the implication I think that you kind of picked up on is that this is the kind of brain that you should bring to the world. And being a humanist isn't just about knowing about Milton, knowing about Shakespeare. Being a humanist is being a critical thinker. We like to use that phrase, but if we actually think about what it means to be a critical thinker, like the actual like radical implications of what that means, it's a way of being. It's a way of being.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. Thank you for listening. I want to just remind you all that if you're not following us on social media, please do. It's always nice to interact with you all, and I'm always posting clips from the podcast, information about our free book club that's on Zoom, and all other kinds of exciting events, and a lot of literary posts. So Instagram is at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and so is our Facebook. We have a LinkedIn, a YouTube channel where you might be watching us now. So, hi, there's a video episode on YouTube. And our TikTok is actually my name. It's at Dr. Rimby. And Patreon is where you can find all the just uncensored, no ad episodes. It's patreon.com/slash ivory tower boiler room. There's usually some kind of deal going on, and you can try it out for a few days for free if you just want to see what gets posted there. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. It means a lot. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you're following us. And I hope you all just enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. I am so excited because I've been thinking with this author's book throughout my rhetoric writing courses, and I just love what she does with her metaphor about writing being on fire. So we'll get into all that, but I want to introduce you to Dr. Rachel Teukolsky, who is a professor of English at Vanderbilt University. We've been like just off air, obsessing over Victorian literature, Oscar Wilde. She, loves pre-Raphaelite art. I saw she teaches a graduate seminar, which I wish I had taken. But every time I get to teach Goblin Market is a fun time. And I want to introduce you to what she has just published for Broadview Press. It's called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college with a really captivating flame on the tip of the pen. Uh, Very supernatural ish. I love it. So, Rachel, welcome to Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Hey, Andrew, thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about my book.
So, I love what you say in your intro, which is like how this project came to be. So, I was wondering if for everyone listening now, you could breathe air to like, what was it for you about making writing culturally accessible in this moment?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so I teach writing every year at Vanderbilt. I know not all of my colleagues do that. Sometimes universities kind of split up the teaching of the writing to teaching of literature, but at Vanderbilt, those two things happen together. Um, so I did kind of find myself like repeating myself every year. Um, and I just thought, I'm not seeing a textbook out there that really captures my sense of what writing is and why it matters.
Mm,
And I just thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to just kind of write that book and have something in book form that I can use in my own classroom, really? Um, and then it was always just kind of a fantasy project. And then the pandemic kicked in, and I was stuck at home with a little bit of extra time. And I just thought, you know what? Now is the time to just do something unexpected and just sit down and do it. And so I wrote it. It's really a passion project for me because I love this kind of writing. I love academic writing, and I think it might sound weird when I say that because traditionally academic writing as a genre is something that those of us who do it professionally, like moan about it, we attack it, we make fun of it, we point out all its flaws. Um, I think it's just kind of sad that we as professional academic writers, like we don't go to bat for our own kind of writing. And then I feel like that also kind of translates to our students because our students are basically being asked to do this kind of writing, and no one ever tells them like why it matters, like how it connects to them as human beings, and why they should care about it. So there are some like actually kind of profound concerns that underpin some of the philosophy behind the book.
And you really, your rhetorical power, your persuasion, your language is so moving. Like love just how you breathe life into what you call a humanistic writing style. And, not every academic book is a page turner, but this is a page turner. Like I agree with you, Rachel. I think that it's so interesting because contemporary culture loves nonfiction. Like they love audiobooks that are biographies, the memoirs, the study of pop culture. But like when it comes to academic books, to make that transition from, oh, this is now academic versus this is mainstream nonfiction, it's like there is a through line. And I really feel like you've done so much justice to understanding why academic writing isn't just important, but it's all around us. But it might, things that we are listening to as podcasts isn't being framed as academic, even though, it's the interpretive questions that you're asking as a listener. So, bravo to what you've done. And, is
Yeah.
that's
And
something
and
that you
just to
hold dearly. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean I think what you're saying might be controversial to some in academia because I do think sometimes as humanistic scholars, we kind of fetishize difficulty and obscurity. Like if you
Yeah.
can't understand something, there's kind of a mystique to it. And so that wall building, I think, invites a certain kind of intellectual exclusivity. Only the elite can really truly understand, a Derrida, a Judith Butler, whoever it is. So I obviously have a really different philosophy of what our writing should aim to do. I would put myself more in the tradition of, say, someone like Raymond Williams, where
Mm.
your politics are about accessibility, about inviting the reader into your writing, not shutting them out, and, wanting to really speak to everybody as much as possible. So for me, there's a kind of political element and a personal element. And I think that that's how then you start to see a continuity between student writing and kind of professional academic writing. You invite the students to actually start becoming scholarly, empower them to be humanistic thinkers in the same way that we are humanistic thinkers.
Yeah, not just consumers of the humanities, but active participants, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's so interesting what you say because, as someone who specialized and I still work on queer theory and queer studies, we fetishize Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick so much, which, I'm not at all putting down Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick. But I think it's interesting because when you read Epistemology of the Closet, the hardest part of that text is literally just understanding these theorems that she puts into place, like understanding her philosophical abstractions about what queerness is. And the human actually feels very absent from a lot of these jargony texts. And it is more of what you've said. It's like a jigsaw puzzle of what does epistemology mean? Like, what is she talking about? And at the end of the day, it's, oh, closetedness, those in the closet, authors who are in the closet. And like, I do think what you bring to bear in your work, Writing on Fire, is when you say that the job of not only a writer, but an educator is making like what seems absurd, or what seems abstract important in the art of reading and writing. And I think that you're right. Why is it controversial for academics to make it translatable, to make abstractions translatable? Like, isn't that our job as trained humanities professionals?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Less jargon. And I mean, I think we don't need to spend a ton more time. I mean, we could spend the whole podcast just on this like really controversial point, but I think when I was younger, when I was a student, I felt like, wow, like this writing is so dense and so difficult, and I don't quite understand it, and that must be because I'm dumb or
Mm,
stupid. But maybe like if I thought about it harder, I could achieve some kind of understanding. And the problem is really with me for not understanding. And I think now that I'm older, and I have a little bit more self-confidence and I can realize like, oh, like I'm actually not dumb. Like I actually am pretty good as a reader and I do it professionally now. And so if I wasn't understanding those things, that wasn't necessarily my fault. And in fact, it totally is possible to translate any difficult concept in the humanities into language that can be understood. Like
mm,
that's possible. Those things don't have to be written that way. Again, I realize this might be controversial, but I think that's what we do now as educators is we translate difficult concepts into language that a less knowledgeable person can understand. So writing is always a choice. The words we use, the phrasings we use, it's a choice. And either we're going to invite people in or we're going to shut them out.
mm. Yeah, like we're literally gonna either solidify the ivory tower or we're gonna actually open it up to the masses. And
Mhm.
I think that when you see like Judith Butler now being interviewed on Democracy Now, or her new book, Who's Afraid of Gender, which is a trade press, you know, there has been now such a recognition that, oh, as a scholar, I need to be accessible to the public. And, if a Judith Butler can make that leap, I think that we all, as humanities educators, can make that leap. And that's why, if I can, I'd love to read a quote that you offer us in the beginning, because I feel like it's going to ricochet into so many ideas, which is you write, the world is burning, the machines are taking over, critical thinkers seem few and far between, but the world of humanistic study is still worth fighting for. The book's tone, landing somewhere between passion and laughter, emerges from these dark times. And, you know, boy, oh boy, I don't know if you imagined all the divisive cultural, political things that would happen, but that feels very, very timely. And maybe if you want to definitely speak to Rachel, what is it in your book, but maybe even with students that you explain to them and your readers the importance of like why does writing matter? Like just that question itself. Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episodes, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Teukolsky, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading. It may be freezing here in the Northeast, but when I received my copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review, it warmed me up instantly. Their new issue is all about kink culture. Let me explain a little. I'm going to read what Jeremy C. Fox, the managing editor, has to say about this issue. He says this issue marks a bit of a departure for the Gay and Lesbian Review as we crack open the bedroom door to explore the practices and paraphilias that interest or obsess some LGBT people and the roots of their appeal. Several future articles delve deeply into why certain kinks turn some of us on, and whether we can discern historical and aesthetic rationales behind these fixations. This magazine features articles such as The Power of the Foot. Oh, yeah, they're going there with foot kinks. Maplethorpe's Gift to America, Reclaiming the Sacred Dungeon. Tumblr was a gateway to kink, and Cruising with Boyd McDonnell. You definitely want to get your hands on the kink issue here. I have an exclusive promo code that those at the Gay and Lesbian Review have granted to you all. It is ITBR Choice. Enter it when you check out on the glreview.org, and you will get a free issue of the magazine. I hope you all enjoy your reading, and it'll definitely keep you nice and cozy.
Yeah, thank you for reading that quote. So that's actually part of like the note to instructors. Just to like put that in context. So I think that language is speaking directly to the educator who might use the book, not necessarily to students. But yeah, it definitely captures our moment. Um, yeah, so one thing that I think I noticed as I was putting the book together is that so the writing I teach at Vanderbilt is required. The courses are required. Students must take this kind of writing course in order to graduate. Most of the students who are in the class are not English majors. They come into the class, I think, with this a vague sense of like resentment or general aggrievement, that they're there, they're being forced to do this writing. It seems like no one has ever really explained to them like why they're being asked to do this writing class, why they should care about anything related to the humanities.
Mhm.
And I do feel like one difficulty with the way colleges set up, their distribution requirements is that students often do kind of come into these classrooms without any understanding of like why it matters that they're there. And I don't get the sense that we as educators are asked to explain to them why it matters, why they should care. And so I actually think that's a really important part of the teaching. It's not just like here's the assignment. I'm going to slap it on the desk. You do it, go, right? So students don't know why they're there, why it matters. They just know it's a hoop they have to jump through in order to graduate. And most of them, at least at Vanderbilt, have been exposed to this kind of writing in high school and English classes. But again, I don't even think necessarily in high school that it's explained to them like why they have to do this. And I think the fact that they do have to do it it seems like increasingly maybe nonsensical to them when our culture so emphasizes STEM, so emphasizes this really kind of utilitarian mindset about education, that you get educated in order to use what you have learned towards a certain type of job that's going to earn you some kind of stability in life after you graduate. And so that is really how they perceive their education. So if they're being forced to do things like write a paper about a novel, it's very hard to explain to them like why they should put time into that, why it matters. It's not something you can translate into, the dollar signs of a job after graduation. Um, and one thing that I do talk about in the book is I think when people make arguments for why humanities learning matters, often it is a utilitarian argument, right? Like in the workplace, you're going to need to know how to read and write. And so this is actually a really important skill for you to learn just to function in your job. Now, I agree with that. I think that is correct and probably should be communicated. But that also just seems like such a limiting way to really understand like why are we here? What are we doing in college? What is the purpose of a college education? Is it really just to kind of set us up to get a job? So what I try to explain is no, there is another way of thinking about what you're doing in college and what we're doing in the humanities, what you're doing in this class, learning about this kind of writing. It is about expressing yourself and finding yourself in a way. Who are you? What do you believe? What are your most important values? How are you a unique thinker? What's your philosophy of the world? And how does it differ from the person sitting next to you, the people in the class? Those are really big questions. I think they are empowering questions. I think it's really easy for students to get lost in college, to just feel like they're disappearing in a classroom, disappearing in the midst of all these other students around them. And so there is something like really powerful to say to a student, like, I care what you think, and you're going to show it to me by learning how to do this kind of writing. And that's why we take a humanities class. That's why we're reading this novel. There are some huge stakes, right? So I have a whole chapter about a thesis statement. And we talk about stakes, like what is a stake? Which again, I think often doesn't get explained. Students are just kind of expected to like know what that word means.
Yeah.
But like let's talk about stakes. Like what is a stake? Like why does a thesis statement, why does an argument in a paper need to have stakes? Well, that's where you express your beliefs about the world as
Mhm.
channeled through your interpretation of this, object that you're analyzing. It might be literature, it might be an artwork, it might be a historical event, but your philosophy comes through in this kind of writing.
And I think it's so helpful that you bring us back to the meaning of a word, that like what is meant when an instructor says stake your claim. And I love what you do with these writing exercises. So this is what, you know, I've done so far, and I'm going to continue to refer to your text and exercises, but I love what you do with actively having students engage with social media, which is something like I've been more and more mindful with the power of persuasive speech when it comes to the video formats on TikTok, the powerful writing when it comes to, like, say, Facebook or other formats. And I had my students, they all have to come up with pop culture topics for a what's called ethnography project of just studying this culture in depth and creating a research essay out of it. And I had them all find a social media post that spoke to their cultural category. And like, so for example, someone found an Ariana Grande fandom video, and like actually paying close attention to, like, well, why is this video grabbing, fans? What is it about the sound, the text, the caption, all the music? And I think you really help Rachel activate that we need to meet our students. I mean, we always hear we need to meet them where they are, but I also think we need to have them know that what they consume is art, and it's also something that has textual components and is persuading them. Like, there's a reason why people get into heated arguments on social media. Like, that means that for some reason it is appealing to, pathos, logos, ethos, if we want to use the rhetorical strategies. But right, like, what is it for you, why you include, so much discussion about, say, social media? And is this coming from the classroom?
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast suite dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers, that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Yeah. So, for people who haven't seen the book, one of the things, I mean, there are a lot of things about the book that I think are pretty unusual and maybe a little unexpected. Um, One thing is the tone of the book. It's written to speak to young writers.
Hmm.
For anybody who's familiar with my scholarship, you might be surprised at the tone that I use in this book because in my scholarship, I think I perform like a much more mature style of communication. But in the textbook, I think I was frustrated with how textbooks often take this condescending, boring tone. It's just like, why would any, you know, young writer, teenager, beginning writer, why would anyone find this interesting to read? If you're trying to teach someone how to write and you've created an incredibly boring textbook, have you perhaps failed at the art of communication with your chosen audience? So the book is just geared towards young people. So it's got more informal phrasings, and then it's got a lot of exercises. That again was a critique that I had of other textbooks that I looked at. Very few exercises, I think, in most
Yeah.
textbooks. They might explain something, but then they don't ask students to put it into practice. They don't activate. So this book has writing exercises almost on every page. Every other page, there's a writing exercise. Um, and the exercises I did again want to gear towards young writers. And I think what's interesting is that the chapters are actually deceptive because a lot of the things that they talk about are really hard. There are a lot of difficult concepts in this book. Like learning how to write humanistic essays, hard. Hard to come up with, what is a good thesis statement? What should a paragraph look like? How do I make writing interesting? I mean, these things are all really hard to do. So I really, again, wanted to translate difficult concepts for young readers. And so that's why you'll notice many of the writing exercises do ask the students to think about social media as an example. So even the chapter that's about thesis statements, here is an example of a flawed thesis statement, and the example is on social media, and then they have to revise it using, something that they've learned in the chapter. So the exercise that you're talking about is from the very beginning of the book, where I suggest in chapter one that the goal of writing, number one goal of your writing, is to interest a reader.
Hmm.
Again, a very basic point, but not one that often gets emphasized. And I especially think for college writers, the college student just knows, like, I got to get this thing done to get a grade. And they forget that, like, there is a human being on the other end of your writing who has to read that thing that you just created. So that is the goal kind of throughout the book, really, is to get students thinking about the reader and then positioning the work towards that reader. And so the exercise that I came up with in that early chapter is go on social media, find a post that you think is interesting, and then write a paragraph where you explain why is it interesting.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so it's a basic question, but the implication is that the same way that you find a social media post interesting, a reader coming to your paper should also find it interesting.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, there's a marketing aspect to social media, but there's, like you said, there is such a, like, rhetoric is everywhere. And that's the thing that your book just opens up. And it's that activation light bulb moment that happens with students that I enjoy so much, right? It's that fulfillment of, oh, they're now questioning the movie that they're watching that just came out, like Wicked. you know, they now have more of a language around cinematography, or even you mention Little Fires Everywhere later when you talk about how to analyze a novel. And I just listened to Reese Witherspoon on Las Culturistas, which have so much respect for Reese Witherspoon as a producer, actor, you know, her book club. And Like when you even ask, can you track the camera of the narration as it moves through the passage? Like even thinking about film type language around how narration works in a novel. Like I feel like you're such a consummate pop culture expert. Like there's so many texts that you rely on that I just imagine that you must be consuming, Rachel, so many different cultural artifacts. Is that true? Or is that just what comes off in the book?
That's funny that you say that. I mean, honestly, so I did have to be self-conscious about which literary examples, like which objects in the book am I going to use as examples? Because when you write a textbook, you are kind of creating a canon.
Mm,
So I wanted to make sure to have so many different kinds of objects, so many different kinds of voices, authors. There is a lot of canonical literature in the book. Just want to make that clear.
mhm,
You know, the chapter on how to analyze poetry, I think there's, Gwendolyn Brooks is in there. Emma Lazarus's sonnet about the Statue of Liberty is in there. We've got Keats, we've got Shakespeare. So there is a fair amount of sort of traditional literature used throughout the book as examples. But having said that, I think especially in the exercises often kind of use pop culture as an example because what the students are being asked to do is engage in a kind of logical operation. So it's like, can you produce the logic that was being taught in this chapter? And yes, the implication is you can use this logic to analyze a Keats poem or to analyze the movie Wicked, right? It's all the same kind of brain work, and it's all the same kind of literary moves that we make in our papers. Um, and the implication I think that you kind of picked up on is that this is the kind of brain that you should bring to the world. And being a humanist isn't just about knowing about Milton, knowing about Shakespeare. Being a humanist is being a critical thinker. We like to use that phrase, but if we actually think about what it means to be a critical thinker, like the actual like radical implications of what that means, it's a way of being. It's a way of being. Um, and so there is something I think really um, amazing about bestowing that, opening that door for students, right? Just as a quick example, again, in that thesis statement chapter, when I'm explaining stakes, there is a writing exercise that asks students to come up with a superhero. Say that you're writing a paper about a superhero where you're analyzing a superhero. Come up with three brief philosophical terms or ideas that you would associate with the superhero. Now think of a different superhero. How do the stakes change?
mhm,
So, how do different sort of characters where we encounter them actually bring to mind different philosophical values based on who the character is, based on who the superhero is? So, it's a pop culture question, but the question itself is actually a profound one, right? Like any object of our analysis is inherently going to bring to the table different philosophical themes or motifs that we can kind of list for ourselves. So again, it's really about a student way of being
mhm.
beyond just this exercise that they have to do for their paper.
Yeah, and it's so empowering. Like you really empower the students as even I love there's a section about them thinking of their persona as a writer, which, you know, again carries forward to how we all carry ourselves. But like when it comes to our writing, it tells a story about, you know, our personality, our we always talk about, you know, don't be afraid to have your voice present. And I am curious, Rachel, AI is all the buzz. I'm sure at Vanderbilt, there's so many conversations about it in your department. Like, how do you weigh in on the catastrophic calls about how AI is taking away students' creative thinking and taking away their voice?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the rise of AI in college life is just an absolute disaster. And it's very dismaying that administrators are so gung-ho about incorporating AI usage into college learning, which just seems to really just miss the point of what goes on in college.
Mhm.
You know, people learn by struggling and failing and trying again. That's how the brain works. That's how you develop the biology in the brain to be able to do things. So if you're just pushing a button to kind of have a computer do something for you, like you're not learning. And I feel like the people that are pushing AI really misunderstand, again, the nature of education and what is the goal in college. Is the goal to get the right answer? Is the goal to kind of capture an agreed upon body of knowledge that can be regurgitated?
Mhm.
Then yes, AI is your program. AI will do all those things for you. But that's not what humanistic thought is, right? What we do in the humanities, like there is no right answer, and every student in the class is going to write a different essay. So, one of the things that the book talks about is defining argument. That an argument is a sense of tension and pushing against and surprising the reader and not just proving the obvious. Um, and we were talking about this actually in class yesterday. And I had the students kind of doing a kind of group conversation amongst themselves. And I heard one of the students say, "This is the anti-AI definition of writing." Because AI is trained on patterns. And so it will always produce the most predictable, most familiar version of literary criticism, the thing that everybody already kind of knows and assumes and produces. Whereas what I think ideally a college essay does is it challenges us. It does something that we didn't see coming, and it shows us that it's doing something unexpected. That's how you interest a reader. You have to like give a more unique take on something, something that's debatable, something that you can argue, rather than just kind of summarizing the bland, obvious stuff.
Yeah, well, and that also begs the question is, how do you weigh in, Rachel, and even specifically, how does your book weigh in, right? It's a living, breathing artifact now with the, I mean, it feels like the collapse of humanistic thinking, but like the push for not really having individuality with creative thought and instead having a very uh, utilitarian, machine minded society. Like, how do, why is writing, so important to break through when it comes to showing that the humanities really matter, but are also essential to the creative individual? Like, how do you think about what's going on right
Mhm.
now with the
Mhm.
humanities in collapse?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I agree with you. I think all the things that we're talking about right now are connected. And the underfunding of humanities departments at universities, the consolidation of departments, the cutting and firing of humanists. These things all really fit with an authoritarian government. I mean, it's Orwellian. the situation that we're in now. And, you know, we do what we can. Each person, you know, does the best to resist these larger forces. Um, but I think at one level, it's important to try not to be demoralized and to bring the passion and enthusiasm to our classroom to really inspire our students to think for themselves because thinking for oneself is a rejection of totalitarianism. So we can make that happen in our classroom. Um, but yes, I mean, I think there is just this kind of larger situation that we're in now. I don't have the answer to how to solve America's political problems, but I absolutely agree with you that the things that are happening in English departments are directly connected to really the dark turn that the country has taken nationally.
Yeah, I know. I every time there is a conversation about this on the podcast, it's always like, you know, we wish we had the answer to turn around this oppressive system. But I do think, work like writing on fire, like even thinking about having the students feel so engaged with that process of creative flow, like what you connect to this metaphor of like being on fire with a passion that they have, so many students I could tell really were interested to dissect that idea of like what in their life do they feel just comes naturally to them, and like why is it that there's this writer's block experience. And that's where your book really opens the door to, oh, maybe I've just been taught or thinking about this from a mechanical view of, you know, it has to be the 5 paragraph structure. It has to, the thesis has to be at the end of the like intro as my last sentence. Like everything feels so formulaic. And that exactly is probably why writer's block is so prevalent. So I just,
Yeah,
man, yeah,
I would love to
yeah.
speak to that because I do feel like that's one of the big controversies within the world of kind of college humanistic writing is about how formulaic should our instruction be. I actually, I'm in favor of formulas, and that might sound weird to come from me, where I've like written a book titled "Writing on Fire." There are actually a lot of formulas throughout the book, a lot of templates, um, because I feel like the two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. I mean, academic writing is a genre, right? A
Mm-hmm.
genre means that there are formulaic things that happen. I'm totally fine with the thesis statement coming at the end of that intro paragraph. That works for me. That makes sense. I think there's nothing wrong with writing a 5 paragraph essay.
Mm-hmm.
To me, a 5 paragraph essay is analogous to a haiku, right? Or a sonnet. It's a form. The problem isn't with the form. The problem might be with how you're taught to fill those boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think actually thinking about the form as a kind of poetic form rather than this more, as you said, kind of mechanistic or mechanical template, that can be more inspiring. But the reason why templates are important is because, in my experience, students often are not taught what to do when it comes to these essays they have to write for the humanities. I think they're much more well trained on the social sciences type of writing. Um, debate a point, video games are bad, they're too violent, or whatever it is. I think that's what students often do in comp, right? Is they learn in those early composition classes, they learn how to do the they say, I say model of debate around social issues, which is great. Like that's a really important kind of writing. But then they come into an English classroom or an art history classroom, and it's like, okay, write a paper about a poem. And they haven't been taught how to do it. And it's actually a really different kind of writing than the social science model. So again, that was another reason why I wrote the book. I do want to give them those kind of templates that they then can take the template and make it their own, right? Which is what we do when we write a haiku or a sonnet.
Mm.
You take the form and then you master it and you reproduce it using your own kind of unique sensibility.
Yeah, and you can read 100 sonnets, and each tells a different narrative, like, or a different
Mhm.
story. And, that's what you're saying is having a form doesn't mean that individual creativity is taken out of the equation. And
Mhm.
Ah, well, your book is so wonderful, Rachel. I absolutely have been recommending it to every writing, every English professor, educator I know. I also think that it would do really well in like a senior level high school classroom, which we got to have a whole other discussion about that, which is there doesn't always seem to be a bridge from senior level high school to then college, uh, which I think is where the writer's block uh, angst can come from is the high school experience, which there's incredible high school teachers, don't get me wrong. I don't want the high school community coming for me. There are great educators, but like just having the not even just the metaphor you present, but the exercises, the examples of literature you provide, the pop culture examples. You truly, Rachel, have. I'm so glad you followed through with your passion project because it is so well done. I love this book. I think it's incredible to have as an educator. So thank you, Rachel, um, for your work. And, where can everyone find you? I know you have a website, so if you want to plug a website, any social media you have, now is your platform.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your kind words, Andrew. And I'm so glad that, you responded to the book and that your students are responding to the book because that's, every author's dream, basically. Yeah, I have a personal website if you want to learn more about me. I have a faculty page at Vanderbilt in the English department there. Um, I do occasionally post on social media on Blue Sky. Um, I still have an account on X. I've been doing less there. Um, Facebook, I guess. Honestly, I think social media now is just a little bit more fraught. I feel kind of strange going on there and talking about my textbook when like so many much more important things are happening in the world. But I will absolutely get on there to post about this conversation and this podcast because I am so thrilled to be here and thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Oh, and everyone, please go to Broadview Press, their website, which is in the show notes, and you'll see a link to Writing on Fire. You get 20% off with the code Ivory Tower. So there you go. It's also the price point is wonderful for Writing on Fire. There's a digital version of the book too. And, Rachel, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much. And, happy semester, back into the groove. I can't
Yeah.
wait to continue messaging you and emailing you about ways that your work has inspired my teaching.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you. Bye, Rachel.